This is the Times Television Network, and you're watching ET Now.
All right, so the final guidelines for new bank licenses are finally out. It's come out slightly earlier than many people were expecting. But let's get a better sense of what this really means for license hopefuls. And we've got one of them joining us on the show, Sachindra Nath, who's Group CEO at Religare Enterprises, joins us. We also have Bharat Doshi, who's Executive Director and Group Chief Financial Officer at Mahindra & Mahindra, joining us on the show. Gentlemen, both of you, thanks very much for coming in to share with us your views on how this could move forward. Sachindra, let me start with you. Would you say that the license norms coming out in a final form is pretty much on expected lines?
No, I think it's more than expected lines, George, because I think so. It has been expanded, and the pre-rejections which were there in the draft guidelines have been taken out. So the pre-rejection criteria like broking, real estate have been taken out. So and also PSUs have now been included. So it opens a very wide spectrum of players who can now participate in at least in the application process. And now it would be up to them to prove that they are fit and proper, and they can further the inclusion agenda of the government and the central bank.
Right, Mr. Doshi, what would your initial reactions to the final guidelines be?
First of all, I'm delighted that the guidelines are finally out. What also I am happy is that the emphasis has been given on a track record, on good governance, on integrity. I'm also glad that it has focused on rural area and inclusiveness, more particularly because Mahindra Finance is a company which qualifies on these counts.
Right, so Mr. Doshi, how ready are you then to apply for a banking license? And again, how well are you positioned against other hopefuls?
Well, the guidelines have been there for some time, and therefore it has given time to companies to prepare. What helped us today was to get the confirmation that we have all the options open, that we have an option of starting a new bank from the group, or the option of NBFC promoting a bank, or the option of converting the NBFC. Now that these are all available, one would look at what's the best way to go about it. But that's one part of it. I can't disclose more till one has studied the guidelines in full, and till these guidelines have been looked at by the board of the company.
Right, Sachindra, just bringing it back to you now, the final guidelines clearly say that public sector enterprises will also be allowed to apply for new bank licenses. Do you worry that when these licenses are handed out, PSUs will be given preference over their private sector counterparts?
No, I don't worry. Look, you have to be very, very clear that the need of the new bank is to further the cause of inclusion, to bring that 50% unbanked population in the country into the banking foray, to further the infrastructure finance. Whether this cause can be taken well taken care by either public sector enterprises or by private sector, it has to be seen in totality. And you will also appreciate the fact that government over a period of time is reducing its capital burden of providing capital to the new banks. So if there is a public sector enterprise which can raise equity from the market and further these causes, obviously they should be given a chance. Any good enterprise which has a track record of good governance, which has a track record of being inclusive, which can further the cause of infrastructure finance and participate in the overall growth of the economy, should be given a chance. Whether they belong to a public sector or private sector is immaterial.
Right, Sachindra, just picking up on that point you made on financial inclusion, I'm going to come back to you on that. But Mr. Doshi, bringing it to you, on the issue of financial inclusion, 25% of a bank's branches will now have to be in unbanked rural areas. Do you believe this could possibly work as a deterrent for many license hopefuls?
Well, it would be a deterrent for many. Again, there I am not at the outset trying to say that it will be an easy walk for us, but the fact remains that Mahindra Finance has 620 rural branches, and with that kind of a size, rural and semi-rural branches, we would have a better chance than others to be able to qualify.
Right, Sachindra, on the issue of financial inclusion, now to the extent that 25% of the bank's branch network will have to be in these unbanked rural centers with a population of less than 10,000, would you say that the business model that all of you license hopefuls come up with will have to be, significantly different from existing banks, and would you say that this actually proves to be one of the bigger challenges for you?
So, number one, George, I don't think so this is a matter of surprise. It is in line with the policy intent of saying that new banks are required to get more inclusive society and get more people into the banking. Now, how do you implement that and how you continue to build a sustainable business model around it is something which people need to work around it. We have been thinking about it for a very long period of time. I think so Religare has been very patient in terms of its capital deployment and various business models. Over the last 10 years, we have built multiple businesses over a wide geography. Fortunately with us, today we have our largest shareholder IFC, which have expertise on financial inclusion, not just in one market, but multiple emerging markets. And I think so with their help and with our experience over a period of time, what we would present would be a very truly sustainable long-term model, which is not only inclusive, but also is profitable for and return accretive for our shareholders.
All right, then let's listen in to Rajiv Takru, the banking secretary, who's in conversation with Mrinalini Krishna.
There are no explicit sectoral leaving out of, there were talks about leaving realty and stock broking companies out. So does that mean all corporates and all sectors are allowed to bid for banking licenses?
Well, there is absolutely no one who has been left out mentioned by name. That is absolutely correct. At the same time, the criteria which has been given, it says fit and proper. So I think fit and proper and the various definitions which are attached to it and the various stipulations which are attached to it are all there. I think we need to read them all very carefully, and due diligence will be done as per the guidelines.
Sir, very strict stipulations you have put in as far as fit and proper are concerned. There are talks about how much the entities can lend to and what they can lend to, the amount of promoter involvement. You've talked about investigative agencies. So do you think these things are going to act as a deterrent as far as certain applications are concerned for corporate houses?
No, I would like to clarify that the purpose is not that anything should act as a deterrent, but these are safeguards. Now, when you build safeguards are built to the purpose. Banking being a sensitive sector, you have to have a certain set of safeguards there, and that is why these have been built in. Now, if it deters somebody, and I think I have said this earlier also on a couple of occasions, if safeguards deter somebody from entering a sector, then perhaps the safeguards have done their job. And we would be very happy if people make a decision based on the conditions which are put here, not to enter the sector, which is perfectly all right. But the conditions are certainly sacrosanct, yes.
Sir, there is a stipulation of 49% FDI in the first 5 years and it has to be brought down. How much investment do you see coming in as far as banking sector is concerned, and do you see a lot of foreign interest coming in for banking licenses as well?
I'm not sure I can give you a figure, but all I can say is that based on whatever feedback we have been getting in the recent past, there is a great deal of interest which is being shown by various people, and 49% FDI means 49%. So it is ultimately the resident who is defined in the policy as a resident. It's the resident who has to lead it, and I expect to see a very positive result.
Sir, by when do you expect the first batch of licenses to be given out? And there is also the PSU has been allowed to apply for licenses. Do you think they have an edge?
No, as far as we see it as a level playing field. That's one. And second thing is the game opens from today when the guidelines come out. The last date of applications is the 1st of July according to the guidelines. And thereafter diligence and examination and advisory body and so on, and a very careful examination, if I may add. I would expect that with a bit of luck and good applications and good applicants, we would be very happy if we saw them coming this fiscal.
This fiscal
Thank
is
you.
an FY13 or FY14 to say. This fiscal would be FY13.
No, this fiscal, I'm sorry. I mean, next year, yeah.
Right.
Next March.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
sir.
Sachindra, about the fact that the final guidelines aren't hugely different from the draft guidelines. So obviously at Religare, you've thought through how you're going to progress towards becoming a bank, converting into a bank, should you get a license.
So if your question is that would Religare be converting into a bank or interested in converting into a bank?
That's right.
So as we have said this earlier also, and if I may repeat, I think so, given the large diversified financial services which we have built in India, we service customer across from corporates, mid-size, SMEs, retail. It is natural for us to progress and have banking under our fold because it would help us to service our customer better, and also given that we have done so much of work around SME financing and now affordable housing finance, it is also our desire to do something which is more inclusive. The reason why we have brought IFC as our largest shareholder also to learn more about inclusion, learn more about how do you build a business which just not add profitability and return on equity but is also add value to the society. So in view of all of that, we are very keen as management team. We will put our best foot forward, and then we have to see that it is obviously it's a comparative analysis and comparative competitive process. If we come out better than others, obviously we should be converted or given a chance to build a bank in India.
Let's listen into D.K. Mittal, former banking secretary and now advisor to the finance ministry, his reactions to the final guidelines being put out.
There's no question of, we decided, both of us decided together, that's my understanding. We are a capital-starved country. Yeah, how many entities would have that kind of capital which we are looking at to be put into banking system? There could be good entities in each category, there could be bad entities. So should we be looking at the entities background or should we be looking at the type of business they are doing into? These were the, discussion held between the government and the RBI, and I think we have come to some understanding which is a fairly good understanding. RBI is the ultimate decision maker, who to give a license, who not to give a license.
Right, Sachindra, I'm going to just bring it back to you now. To the extent that the new license hopefuls will have to come up with a different business model, would you agree that in your search for talent, finding the best people and rewarding them at market determined rates is not going to be so easy, to the extent that you've got to pursue a slightly different business model where you need to focus on keeping your costs down?
I think so you're presuming that the search for the talent, the scarcity of the talent in other business is lesser than the banking business. Contrary to your belief actually, George, the availability of talent in the newer businesses like asset management, life insurance, capital market is far greater and far higher because those businesses are new in India versus commercial banking which has been present here for a very long period of time. I think so we have to go and find sets of people who understand the value, who understand the ecosystem and who are aligned and motivated to build a banking business for long term. Having said that, as you know, we run a 15,000 or 40,000 odd crore non-banking finance business. We underwrite credit for more than now 20,000 SMEs across 50-60 markets, and we have a very strong management team which is spread across sales, distribution, underwriting, treasury, which itself would be a big value add when we have to convert our NBFC into a bank. And Religare has demonstrated over a period of time the ability to bring talent across our various businesses, right from CEOs to the full management team, and who had delivered and created business value in a very short span of time. And that is a combination of the model of sharing the wealth in form of the equity, and I think so we will follow that model here again.
Right, Sachindra, we'll come back to you in just a moment, or rather there's another issue that came up. That is, the fact that in the draft guidelines, if you look back at the draft guidelines, the RBI had suggested in the draft guidelines that, corporates that actually get a bank license should not be allowed to use their brand name when they do get that bank license. They've stayed silent on that issue in the final guidelines. Would you say that's a big positive that you will actually be allowed to use the brand when you set up the bank?
Yes and no, both. The reason for that is that there is a global trend where people are saying that the large brands which are not connected through financial services, there should be a deterrence that those brands should not be used for financial services, because there may be a tendency for people believing in the brands more than the capital power of the business itself. Having said that, in Indian context it is very different, because large brands in India, people tend to rely upon them and they are seen as much more trustworthy. So I think so from that perspective, in Indian context, the furtherance of cause of new banks would get enhanced when these large groups or the trusted brands can be used for the brand and for the bank itself. As far as us are concerned, Religare is a brand which is predominantly for financial services. The group's other businesses, which is healthcare, is in a different brand. We don't converge brand for businesses, and that has been the tradition for our group.
Right, we'll come back to you, Sachindra, but Mr. Doshi, bringing it to you, you are already in the financial services space. Do you plan to convert Mahindra Finance into a full-fledged bank?
Well, we'll definitely look at this opportunity.
But also, Mr. Doshi, the cross-holding norms are really stringent. For instance, the bank's holding company cannot deal with equity and debt of any group companies. Do you think it could come in the way for many license hopefuls?
No, I don't see any problem at all, because I think it is the right thing that there should not be any inbreeding and putting money into group companies, etc. The bank should operate as a bank with arm's length transactions with the outside world.
Right, again, you know, Sachindra, in the initial draft guidelines, the RBI had clearly said that banks will have to list within 2 years of the license being given to them. In the final guidelines, they say 3 years. Do you believe this relaxation is useful for you, that you'd have ideally liked it to have been a little more time that you got?
Yeah, I think so. If you were to set up a new bank from the beginning, then either it is 2 years or 3 years, both are insufficient to list a business, because you have to have certain size of scale, profitability to attract global institutional investors. But for the people who would convert their existing non-banking finance business, because those businesses already have profitability, already have scale, 3 years is a very, very good and sufficient time.
All right, let's also get some more reactions to the new bank norms being put out. Let's listen to Ashwin Parekh, who's National Leader for Global Financial Services at Ernst & Young.
Now, on account of this particular climb down, even people who have a large presence in real estate or in the broking business can also apply. So can therefore, to that extent now, the regulator will have to, or the committee that the regulator will form, will have to really evaluate the applications, in terms of any contagion risk that, the presence of these people in speculative business can bring about. I'm not certainly expecting 150 or 200 people to get licensed. And so to that extent, that part of the evaluation will now be done once, let's say, people have applied in keeping with the guidelines.
Right, Sachindra, if we just take it back to the, the 25% of branch network having to be in unbanked rural centers, apart from that clause that the RBI has brought into the final guidelines, they have said that the new banks will have to continue to stick to existing priority sector lending requirements that are applicable to domestic banks. Do you believe that that could have been relaxed a little, because you already are heavily focused on financial inclusion on the one hand already?
I think so. You should look at the broader message which the central bank is trying to give. The broader message is, if you want to take banking in India is a very, very profitable business. Most of the banks generate more than 25% return on equity. But to get to that level, you have to have capital backing, and you have to have patience. And that's why, whether it is the capital adequacy which has been kept higher, whether it is to apply the same prudential norms in terms of the priority sector lending, or whether it is the 25% branch norm, all of that would lead to slightly higher amount of capital and more longer wait period for you to become really profitable and generate a very attractive return on equity. But people who genuinely believe, who have the ecosystem and who have desire to be banked should be fine with that. That's my belief.
All right. We'll come back to you, but let's just get one more reaction. K.R. Kamath, Chairman of the Indian Banks Association, who has said that the new norms are on expected lines.
I think they are almost on the expected lines. I think the RBI has taken care to see that all those required precautions are taken. At the same time, there is an open space available to everybody. There are very clear guidelines on lending to the promoter groups, which has been, I think, again reiterated today, that any board, any company, any bank cannot lend to the promoters groups. And there are very clear restrictions already existing. So it is not the question of what are the other activities of the promoters, but it is what that particular bank does. To that extent, I would say that there are sufficient safeguards on that.
Mr. Doshi, new norms allow even public sector entities to apply for a license, and this is a question that we'd asked Sachindra just a short while ago. Do you think this will give them an edge over their private sector counterparts?
Well, I hope not. I feel that it is a good thing to allow a level playing field to everybody. On the other hand, I'm sure that RBI will be fair and not have a bias in favor of public sector against private sector.
All right, Sachindra Nath and Mr. Bharat Doshi, both of you, thanks very much indeed for joining us on our special coverage of banking, the next wave, where we've looked at the new license, the final guidelines for new bank licenses.